Good afternoon and welcome to Tokyo on Fire. Today is April 24th, 2015. Today's burning issue is nuclear power in Japan. The reason why it's a burning issue today is because all of the nuclear reactors have been shut down. Japan has 54 of them. They provide about 20-30% of Japan's overall power. Court battles are going on the safety and the restart of these nuclear power facilities. And for an island country that is dependent on outside resources for its fuel, more than 95% of its fuel is from outside resources or generated internally through nuclear power, this is a huge issue. It's topical right now, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Michael Cucek. Michael Cucek is adjunct professor at Sophia University, and he's teaching political science. He is also adjunct fellow at Temple University. He is the author of the foremost blog on Japanese political issues called Shisaku. So before we get into the burning issue today, I'd like to just ask Michael what kind of issues he's facing now through his daily life as he's advising clients, friends, colleagues, and as he's going about his daily life in teaching Japan's upcoming academics. What issues are kind of front and center right now? Michael?
For me this week, what's really been important is really a technical issue. It seems kind of really dull, but it's really important in terms of the burning issue that we're talking about today. And that is the base load percentage. I mean, okay, I'm sure half of the audience is already asleep when they hear that, but that's really important, is that up until now, the government has been really cagey about how much nuclear power Japan will be using. They've been trying to say, a lot, some, a great deal, but
fossil
never,
fuels balanced to nuclear.
They say there's a balance of something, but never getting down to hard numbers. Mm-hmm. And they even released a national energy plan with no hard numbers in it and earned universal scorn for avoiding this issue. Finally, this week, after the first round of the local elections, with the LDP winning very big, or at least doing better than anybody could have expected even a few weeks ago. This issue of restarting the nuclear power plants seems to have gone down a little bit in terms of the sensitivity. And as a consequence, the government seems to have a lot more confidence. And this week, just yesterday, they came out finally with a number. The number is 22%. Now, 22% of the base load means more than a dozen nuclear power plants have to restart in order to supply this amount of power. So we're looking at a list of nuclear power plants that's longer than the current list of the short list of plants that are on for restart.
Okay.
And for you, what's the most striking thing this week?
Well, you know, as we've spoken before, the Prime Minister is going to Washington, D.C. next week, towards the middle of next week. He'll be in the United States for a week. This is huge for me because direction will be determined and meetings will be had, things will be said. It's a huge opportunity for Japan to come front and center to begin to explain its position on various issues, military, regional security, a lot of things that involve the United States in particular. That's hot on my plate. Mm-hmm. In addition, the AIIB, the Regional Asian Development Bank, recently launched by China, and the admission of Japan into that. And finally, TPP. I think that the Japanese are roundly considering to join the Asia-Pacific Regional Trading Partnership. And I think the Prime Minister is in a position to make some sort of an announcement when he goes to Washington, D.C. Everybody's waiting for that. So those are issues that I'm following. Mm-hmm. Okay, getting into our burning issue today, which is Japan's nuclear power. Mm-hmm. You know, one could be forgiven for thinking with 127 million people on an island country that is continually attacked and suffers from massive earthquakes, tsunami, all sorts of disasters of erupting volcanoes. What in the hell are you doing with nuclear power?
Yeah, and that's one of the arguments that was used against the Sendai nuclear power plant, the first one to get official recognition and official approval by the Nuclear Regulatory Agency, the new one that they've put together. It was the first one, and the local communities that were against this restart immediately said, what if one of the large volcanoes nearby erupts, which happens rather frequently, and you haven't thought about that, and they brought them to court. this idea of having nuclear power plants on the Ring of Fire, as it's called, in the Pacific, seems a bit daft. And
Many people actually laughed, didn't they?
Well,
With volcanoes erupting and big earthquakes?
Well, the thing is, there's a real problem in terms of siting. Okay, you have to put the power plant in a geologically stable site, of which there's practically none. There are practically none in Japan. But you also have to put them in a politically stable site. And that's the tricky business in terms of this particular issue, in that the siting of nuclear power plants is not based on economic efficiency or power lines being closest to them or things like that. It was based, according to the research by Daniel Aldrich of Purdue University, on a single criteria.
Site selection.
Site selection was done based on a lack of community. That the places where you would put these very, unwanted, if not, they may not have been terribly dangerous, but they were still undesirable plants, always turned out to be places where people had very few social bonds, where the communities were rather weak. And unsurprisingly, once the nuclear power plants were built there, the communities became dependent on them and are now clamoring for their return or the restarts, except, of course, in Fukushima, where the local communities disappeared because they had to be evacuated. This issue of having these nuclear power plants in communities that they want them, where they're wanted, but which were marginal communities, which are places that don't have social bonds. This kind of tension exists politically, not economically, not geographically, not geophysically. But what happens then is there are nuclear power plants in places where there simply should not be in terms of geophysics, near fault lines, near volcanoes, near geologically active places where no geologist would ever put them, but that's where the community was weak. And there are several of these plants that will never reopen, that the courts will never allow. The Tsuruga plant, for example, which if you look at it from a map, from someone like me from California, where you look at things, you say, okay, that's where the fault is. You see it's right on a fault. And you say, there's no way anyone would have ever put that there.
Well, they keep carving the hillside with trowels, don't they?
Yeah, they're constantly saying, is it an active fault?
Is it moving? Has it
moved in the last 100,000 years? Has it moved in the last 10,000 years? And as a Californian, I say I just laugh because you really are playing literally with fire, which of course nuclear power plants are.
Right.
But to place it there, how did it ever get there? Well, it's because nobody else wanted it.
Well, here's, I guess, the dilemma. Japan is an energy-dependent nation. All the energy it has. There is some water resources that produce hydropower
plants,
but it's very small. 6%.
Very small amount of wind power now.
Right.
Yeah.
And so until many of the nuclear power plants became online, which is just in recent history over the late 80s and 90s, Japan was almost completely dependent on oil.
Right.
And mostly from the Middle East.
Right.
And I guess over time with the wars, the Hormuz Straits, many of these issues coming up and just the cost of oil, they've had to come up with another solution, and the most obvious one is nuclear power.
The whole idea that Japan had to become energy independent when it doesn't have a lot of what we would call, it has virtually no hydrocarbon resources, except for they're trying to look right now at methane hydrates,
the
deep frozen,
right.
deep sea methane deposits that could be mined. There are a lot of very, very difficult environmental issues that have to be dealt with.
But there's plenty there.
There's plenty of there all around the world, but mining them would release greenhouse gases. There's all kinds of issues there. But otherwise, there's almost nothing.
Right.
But you want to be energy independent because they were shocked out of their mind by the first oil embargo in the 1970s, in the 1974, 75. And 73 in terms of the Yom Kippur War. That pushed nuclear power very hard. But not just nuclear power, the nuclear fuel cycle of taking spent fuel from the nuclear power plants and not burying it like many countries are planning to, encasing it in glass and burying it deep, but actually reprocessing it. Reprocessing means plutonium. And Japan has had its nuclear fuel reprocessed up until now in Europe, both in England and in France.
Sending most of it back?
All of it back. So Japan, in terms of plutonium, is a superpower with over 44 tons of plutonium in its stockpile. That's supposed to be burned either as mixed oxide fuel or in a breeder reactor. The breeder reactors program is dead. None of the currently regular nuclear power plants is operating, so the mixed oxide fuel is also piling up. And it requires a special licensing program in order to burn that instead of the regular uranium pellets. All this was supposed to make Japan independent. What it has done instead is created a situation where Japan has all of this fissionable material, no nuclear power plants running. It's about to put online its own reprocessor, and the populace wants out of the whole thing after hundreds of billions of dollars of investment. And for industry and for the government, they're gagging at this. The nuclear industry is very strong here, and it's hard to argue with the fact you've sunk so much money into it. To walk away is just really hard.
Well, it's very much politically ingrained as well, isn't it? The reality is, though, that Japan will really never become self-sufficient in energy resources, right? I mean, before the 3/11 triple disaster, Japan had about 33% of its overall power being generated by nuclear power. That shut everything down. And even now, without the nuclear reactors, they're importing oil, and the resources of the country are continued dwindling. They need to restart those reactors.
Yeah, we don't know how long it's going to be that Japan will enjoy the benefits of low oil prices, which the entire globe, aside from the oil producers, is enjoying right now. It's a huge letdown, actually, for the government, because one of their strongest arguments for the restarts was that oil was so expensive. Now that the price of oil has gone down and the use of bunker oil is not contributing as much to the trade deficit, and trade deficits in Japan are so rare as to cause panic when they happen, and they happened after 3/11 constantly, because Japan had to make up for the lost nuclear power. That argument has fallen to the wayside. And again, this week, that marked a huge shift in the way the government was arguing about what we should be doing about nuclear power. Up until this week, they've been emphasizing strongly that it's in order to deal with our trade deficit. It's in order to deal with this surge in natural gas and bunker oil that we've had to import to make up for the lost nuclear power plants. This last week, they turned the corner and decided to go with the other argument that makes a lot of sense, which is CO2 emissions. And wow, they have set a huge target in terms of CO2 emissions reductions. And the only way they're ever going to get near that is if the nuclear power plants restart.
Well, it's a pretty topical issue because, I mean, frequently, even in Tokyo, the winds that blow in from China are bringing all sorts of debris, the sand, and lots of petrochemical soot, and it just is really uncomfortable, and it keeps people focused on
here
that.
in Tokyo, it's actually we get so little of it because we're on the western side of the eastern side of the country. In the west, in Fukuoka, in Kyushu, they share the same air as North China, and their skies are gray. Here in Tokyo, they're blue. Which is the reverse, of course, of what's going on in China, where the capital is wreathed in pollution. But for the people of Kyushu and Western Japan, coal-based, fossil fuel-based, the cars of Beijing, all that, needs to be replaced by an electric future. That electric future only comes through nuclear power. And China's nuclear program has not in any way slowed down. They have seen Fukushima and they said, that's not our problem. This is very different, however, from what was a few weeks back a big turning point in the Japanese, for a lot of people, was the visit of Angela Merkel of Germany. The Germans, seeing Fukushima, got out of nuclear power and committed to that. And for the Japan anti-nuclear community, her visit was, here's the person who understood. Our government doesn't understand what the message of Fukushima was. Here she is, and she lectured basically the government of Japan in many ways, or at least that's the way the anti-nuclear movement portrayed it.
Well, I think the real thrust of the Nuclear Power Association, the power industry here, is it's safe, it is reliable. Accidents like this don't often happen, and it's unfortunate that Fukushima happened. That was a one-off. It'll never happen again. Please trust us. Let us continue. Let us turn the reactors back on. Let us build a bunch more.
Yeah, they were lucky up until Fukushima. Basically, they did have nuclear accidents. It was involving the reprocessing centers.
Very few.
Very few, but nevertheless, they did have fatal accidents. They had the ridiculous criticality issue at one place where there was a gauge where water was supposed to, carrying plutonium, was supposed to go through a set of pipes. And the workers, because it was a pain in the butt, just started using buckets. And because they put a sufficient amount of sufficiently enriched water into the system, they started a criticality within the system, which would have never happened if they used the equipment properly. That happened. And that
But they were wearing rubber boots.
in one of the, I remember if both of them died or one of them died, but it was a fatal criticality issue, and it was immensely stupid, and it made the nuclear, but the nuclear power plants, up until Fukushima, could always argue, oh, 3 Mile Island, that'll never happen here. Chernobyl, never happen here. That's those incompetents. We look at how safe we are, right? And when the great Niigata earthquake happened and shook the world's largest nuclear facility, which is the Kashiwazaki facility with 7 operating nuclear power plants on a single site, it shut that down, but there was no radiation release. Things fell inside and it looked kind of messy, but it seemed to argue that you're right, the safety is really great. Fukushima blew all that away.
Well, one of the other issues that you raised when you talked about the issues that are occupying your thoughts right now was perhaps the manipulation of the nuclear power industry to build these plants in localities that didn't have a cohesive community sense. They couldn't really defend themselves against the onslaught of money, of buying land, of building community centers and that sort of thing. And it seems that that's a thread that just runs through this whole story. And it's been picked up by the foreign press as well, that in Japan, there appears to be a very tight collusion between the regulators and the industry. And not only that, but that there is a very tight cap on how information is distributed, how things are explained. And we saw that at Fukushima. Even the week after that, there was a nuclear explosion, and you wouldn't hear about that, and you only heard about that, weeks and weeks later.
Yeah, the disaster at Fukushima began even before the first hydrogen explosion, when the Prime Minister of the time, Prime Minister Khan, felt he could not trust the people around him, giving him scientific advice in the Kante. He could not trust the power company for its information from the site. So he felt it necessary the day after this massive earthquake and tsunami to fly and personally talk to the plant manager who has since passed away. And we've lost a great source of information on just what happened when the Prime Minister came and asked for him, what's going on? What can I do for you? What do you need to do? That broke the back of the nuclear power industry's claim that we were in control. We know what we're doing. We're going to be able to handle this. No, they couldn't. And revelation after revelation has come up, not only of collusion between the regulators, and in fact, the Japanese regulatory agency was pulled out of the Keizai Sangyosho, the economics and industry ministry, and made an independent agency because it was just not trustworthy. And there was long time hiding of facts. There was long time commitment to nuclear power that was far, far more than was prudent. It really destroyed every shred of trust that the people had in the industry. And you have to admit, this is really quite astonishing. And in a place where you don't have tens of thousands of people surrounding the Conte, but only a few hundred on a given Friday night when they have the anti-nuclear rallies. It's really minor. Nevertheless, the public image and the public sentiment toward nuclear power, even as their power bills climb because of this imported oil and gas, is still strongly against the restarts at all levels.
Yes, well, about 80% in public opinion surveys, about 80% of the entire nation of Japan is opposed to restarting the reactors and
or at least doing it fast.
Right.
Yeah, or maybe some of them are a little bit, hedging. Oh, maybe somewhere down the line, but not now. When that is, nobody knows.
Right. Well, this distrust of the government and of certification and safety agencies that say this is safe, we've run this test, it's ready to go, let's turn on the switch, and a suit being filed and the court finding that yes, we really don't trust that certification process, and no, you can't turn it on.
Yeah, that happened a week ago in Fukui with the Fukui District Court decision coming down that the certification process is insufficient, that safety has not been established, and that the nuclear power plant cannot restart. It was the first time the Fukui District Court in history had ever issued an injunction. And the NHK Evening News felt that they had to do a special section. What is an injunction? Because this is such a rare occurrence. This week, the Kagoshima District Court, which has jurisdiction over the Sendai plant, the first plant that was certified, gave an opposite ruling, saying yes, the procedure done by the nuclear regulators is okay. It's more than sufficient. The plant can go forward. So we have these two decisions. The Fukui decision probably won't last in the next level, in the high court level. It will probably be overturned. The plaintiffs there will say, we take it to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court will probably look at it and say, it's the matter of the regulators should be dealt with in the lower courts, or maybe come with a decision even saying that the regulated agency has done its job. The chances that this Fukui decision will be held up and will serve as a way of holding back nuclear restarts, probably not going to happen. But up until now, the government has never had anything to fear from the courts.
Right.
Now they have to have at least a little cautious feeling.
The nuclear, it's not a homegrown industry, is it? I mean, the nuclear industry really grew out of countries who had nuclear power probably for military purposes, the United States, Russia. But the Japanese, the plants that they have for producing nuclear power are not homegrown plants. They're basically imported or run or designed by foreign companies.
Basically, the two designs were basically from United States or from Canada, the can-do design. But of course, the Japanese adapted them. And now, whether because it's a part of the national export strategy or because it's a part of the national energy strategy, with numbers or not, Japanese companies are one of the few companies that are acquiring nuclear divisions of other companies around the world. So that Toshiba here wants to be a big player in nuclear power, even as in Japan, it cannot do anything. It cannot sell a new plant. It cannot build a new plant. Well, they're going to be restarting the building of nuclear power plants just to maintain the 22% level that they've talked about. And that's going to be happening in Yamaguchi Prefecture, in Aomori Prefecture. Again, prefectures well away from the population centers. So in terms of safety, they will be in fairly good locations. But nevertheless, those will only be a few reactors. And we have a whole generation of 40-year-old reactors that are coming up for relicensing. And in most cases, the power companies are saying, we want out. They don't want to deal with the retrofitting of those plants.
Okay, but let's be real. Is it not inevitable that the Japanese have to have nuclear power to sustain the level of growth? Even since the nuclear disaster of 311, consumption of energy has increased, not decreased. It's actually increased through industry and through personal consumption as well. That's not being facilitated by more plants being produced, or even the plants that are online producing, at capacity.
But it's been very hard to argue that because the economy hasn't fallen into a hole. Anti-nuclear activists say quite reasonably, look, we had way too much capacity in terms of a normal mix of nuclear power plants, backup plants that run on fossil fuels, the solar energy, hydro energy. We had way too much capacity. We had a disaster. We shut down all the nuclear. And because we had all of that extra capacity, we've done fine. The only place where we've blown it is in terms of our carbon emissions. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, the economy is chugging along. Industrialists see it a completely different way. They see that the power companies are bleeding red ink somewhere. It's not in their quarterly figures. All of them, except one, the Kyushu Dendryoku, which runs the Sendai plant, the first plant that's going to be restarted. All the other ones are, even Tokyo Electric, the operators and owners of the Fukushima complex, they're booking profits, mm-hmm. right? And it's been an argument that has not gone forward in the government's and big businesses' way.
Yeah, well, something has to happen. I mean, it's supply and demand. If the demand is high and the supply is low, that will be reflected in costs. And the costs do increasingly begin to show up on people's balance sheets.
But it is a real misunderstanding if you stay only in Tokyo. If you take a train, a long-distance train, maybe not the Shinkansen, but one of the local trains, a local express, you start, once you get 50, 60 kilometers out, passing all these solar farms mm-hmm. on the sides of the train line that weren't there 5 years ago. And one of the results of the 311 disaster was the passage of the special feed-in tariff, the FIT, mm-hmm. which made it possible for people installing solar farms to receive a huge bonus in terms of the way they would be repaid by power companies for supplying power at a much higher rate than geothermal, than wind. So we have just lots of former rice paddies absolutely carpeted with these solar farms. Mm-hmm. And so and currently elsewhere in the world, solar isn't doing so well, but in Japan, it's still doing very well, so well that the power companies, if they accepted under the FIT all of the generating capacity that is been submitted to them in contract form, it would be the equivalent of 80 nuclear power plants. Now, they don't have the ability to pay for that power at that rate. There has been a lot of pressure to reduce the FIT tremendously and bring in other forms of renewable energy. But those things are there. They've already been installed, and more of them are on the way. Mm. So again, the argument for nuclear power has become a bit weaker. And that might be, in fact, the reason why the government finally came down with this number, 22% for the base load.
Well, it was about 33% before the triple disaster. Then it fell down, probably around 18%. And now with all of them cut off, it's not even on the radar.
Well, you start, as you said, with the 55, 54 original power plants.
Right.
Then we lose the 6 at Fukushima because they're going to mothball reactor 5 and reactor 6. They're going to take out the whole thing, even though they are still functional. That's 6 there. You're going to take out 5, maybe 6 in terms of retirement for being over 40. You're already down 29, 30 plants in that region, okay? Mm-hmm. So the actual capacity of the remaining plants may just exactly fit that 20% and be no more. Mm-hmm. That what we were living off of 33% nuclear generated before, we won't have the capacity to make that. And so that's the reason for this government reducing by over 10%.
So what's the future?
The future is hard because we only really have 10 to 12 plants that are in the pipeline. Mm-hmm. Beyond 10 to 12 plants, you start getting into siting issues, you start getting into age issues that make it harder for the government and set up a longer time schedule for the government to okay, well, the independent agency to okay the restarts. At the same time, we have currently a much lower level of pressure due to the price of oil. How long we enjoy that, how long this glut continues, we don't know. So it really depends on how much a world recovery affects the price of oil, is one. How much of that extra cost is passed on to consumers, because consumers have not yet been hit fully, even a few years down the line, with the costs of this increase in the use of hydrocarbons in replacing nuclear power. And the third thing is the stability of the current government. And in that regards, the most recent local election results and the ones that are going to happen this weekend on Sunday seem to indicate that Mr. Abe is all-powerful, the Abe administration is stable, that there is going to be a very strong governmental push for nuclear restarts, even over the objections of locals.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the default then is fossil fuels, is it not? Fossil fuels to motor the vast majority of Japan's energy needs.
But where would they come from, in your view?
Well, it's got to come from the Middle East, where it's always come from. The Japanese are the major consumers of Middle Eastern oil.
Which brings up the relationship that you brought up at the beginning of this show, which is the relationship with the United States on a security level.
Exactly, and the revision of the Constitution and Article 9, and can we support and facilitate the United States or any of our allies in the event of an attack or some sort of a shipping embargo going on in the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, and that's the discussions that have been going on. They've been temporarily suspended during the month of April because of the local elections, but May, once again, after we get past the Golden Week holidays, starting around May 7, the Komeito and the ruling LDP get back to their discussions of what the revision of the security guidelines is going to entail. Mm-hmm. How is Article 9, which of course the Prime Minister wants to change, but can't do anything about just yet, mm-hmm. how Article 9 and the government's decision last year on July the 1st that Japan can use collective security, can engage in it, can partake in the right to collective security guaranteed in the UN Charter, how it can help the United States. And the big one is a blockade of the Hormuz Straits. Japan would send minesweepers, mm-hmm. and that would be even if there were shooting going on, which Japan has never done before.
Right. It seems like now we're talking about something that's very removed from the nuclear issue, but all of these issues are somehow intertwined. I mean, the fact that the Prime Minister is going to Washington, D.C. The Prime Minister went to Jakarta. He met with the Premier of China. They seem to have a little bit better chemistry going on there. Mm-hmm. These things all, they all make sense. They all have a political impact. The issues that not just define the nuclear issue, but they have spillover effects everywhere else. There's lots of news that's going on that make one step back and wonder where this is all going to end.
In the case of the visit to the United States, the timing is really bad, but there's nothing anyone can do about the timing. Abe will be speaking on the emperor's birthday. Mm-hmm. Some Korean American groups have a problem with that, but more importantly for the United States, the TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations, are still deadlocked.
Right.
And in the security issue, the LDP and the Komeito have not produced the legal basis for this collective security behavior that Abe is going to go to President Obama and talk about, supposedly, and go before Congress and talk about. He really doesn't have the deliverable, mm-hmm. the gift, the omiyage to bring with him, but he's going to be talking about it anyway. So the sequencing, for this administration, sequencing has been very important, and they've been really good at it. Here, everything got all jumbled up, and that eventually you have to put that back on the Prime Minister for calling the election back in December, right. which threw the entire legislative calendar off for the month?
Well, I mean, next week is Golden Week. We have elections on Sunday. We enter into Golden Week towards the end of next week. It'll be for 1 week, and that is a time when many politicians, the Prime Minister included, typically travel to Washington, D.C., meet constituents in political areas in Washington. People are coming back to Tokyo at various times of the year too. But really, during Golden Week is the time when the Japanese politicians travel throughout the world.
Yeah, but particularly to Washington.
Yes.
And this time, the Prime Minister is one of them. It's true. The Golden Week holidays have usually been the time in the legislative calendar when the Diet just sort of, they all head out
Yes,
of the
they do.
country.
Right.
And it doesn't matter whether they're LDP or DPJ or any of the only people who probably stay home are the communists.
Well, it's an ideal time. It is spring. Washington, D.C. is beautiful. The cherry trees that were a gift from Japan, 50 years ago, they're in full bloom.
Yeah, maybe it's a century ago. I'm not from Washington. I don't know.
Oh.
But they've been there for a long time. And the relationship is a long-term one. And it's exceptionally warm, not necessarily because of Mr. Abe, and perhaps it's a little bit cooler because of Mr. Abe's personal views regarding history, but in terms of the geopolitics, Mr. Abe's being the first Japanese prime minister to address Congress is sending a message throughout this region. Japan's a geopolitical player. We value Japan. You in the region may have problems with Mr. Abe's personal views, but Japan, it is a player.
Do you think his reception in the United States will be somewhat cool? Not at the political level, but overall, you think that will be somewhat cool?
I think in the White House there may be problems. Outside the White House, there are a lot of people who want a better U.S.-Japan relationship and are willing to look the other way on certain issues having to do with history so as to push the economic relationship through the TPP and other avenues, particularly in New York City, where the financial industry is located. They love Abenomics. It's a great way to make money for them. It may not be great for Japanese people, but for people in international finance, it's been a wonderful ride. They're for it. The defense industry is clearly for it. Anything that has to do with Japan's becoming more of a militarily active power, sure, they love that.
But at the popular level, listen, I think, let's revisit this next week on Tokyo on Fire and see what kind of popular appeal the Prime Minister's visit has. And I believe that it will have a tremendous popular upswell. I think he will be received very favorably, and I think his speeches will be well received.
It depends on how much control they have over the venue. You have to understand that the Prime Minister right now here in Japan he's not seeing the people here either. He just recently had his cherry blossom viewing party at Shinjuku Gyoen.
My invitation got lost in the mail.
So did mine. But it was like they invited groupies. They all were just giggling and screaming. It's the Prime Minister. It was
a lot of movie stars. It was just really.
It was really
pretty
hyper.
Yes.
And I hope he doesn't get a sense that, wow, the people are really into me, because that was a selected audience, you know?
Sure.
He wasn't going out in the streets. He was within the confines. It's fenced off.
Sure. Invitation only.
Invitation only. And the Kante is very clear about who gets in and who doesn't. This is all, might just be going to the Prime Minister's head. And we have to be, I was shocked this week when at the 60th anniversary of the Bandung Conference, which is why he was in Jakarta for that ceremony, and for that chance to make a speech. Oh, do you hear that?
Yes.
Oh, it's election season, isn't it?
I almost forgot.
Like we could ever forget. Yes, this is the way it's been for all month of April.
Yes, it has. Vote for me. My name is...
What is your name?
I didn't quite hear it.
I didn't get it either.
Well, it is election season in Japan, and it is unmistakable, with the sound trucks that travel throughout all of the neighborhoods. Every road that can be traversed by a truck with a loudspeaker balanced on its roof is going to get this message multiple times throughout the day.
But getting back to what we were saying, at the Bandung Conference, he delivered a speech Basically, what was supposed to be a carbon copy of a speech that had been given 10 years ago by then Prime Minister Koizumi on the anniversary of the Bandung Conference. Now, the Bandung Conference was in 1955 sort of a really edgy kind of thing where the heads of state of Asia and Africa got together. And Japan, even though it was a U.S. ally under the first security treaty, we now live under the revised treaty of 1960, but even though they were in the U.S. camp, they came to this conference, which was supposed to be of non-aligned nations, nations not participating in the Cold War. And Japan was clearly vacillating between whether we're on the U.S. side or whether we can be with the developing world. And later on, in the 1960s, Mr. Abe's grandfather, Mr. Kishi, said, "Bam, we're going with the U.S. This is where we are. We're going to be part of the West." But now, Abe came to this conference with his speech, and instead of putting in the word apology, owabi, he crossed that out, and it was not there. The strongest sense that you got of a remorse for World War II, for the invasion of China, for the colonization of various countries of Southeast Asia, was the word hansei, which there's a huge argument going on in the Japanese analysis community. What does that mean? It means, well, reflection. And I'm on record as saying that it means I recognize that this is a topic and nothing more.
Right.
Some people say that it's equivalent to apology. It's a big question, and that reflects very badly on the 70th anniversary speech that's coming up.
Right.
It's made me much more worried about it than I was a week ago. Now I'm really concerned.
Yes, well, I understand that. And sometimes the Prime Minister is sending signals that we pick up because we're watching very closely. And other times people are sending the Prime Minister signals too, aren't they? I'm talking about the drone.
Oh.
Okay, that's a signal that was sent. And it was sent very directly and very
right onto his roof.
Yes,
yeah.
It was.
And the details of this story have only just begun. The National Police Agency, understandably, doesn't want to talk too much about it because drones are cheap. And they would be maybe dealing with dozens of them per day if people really thought this was a great way to protest the government's policies.
Just to catch people up, a drone was found on the rooftop of the Prime Minister's residence yesterday?
Yeah.
Right? And it was not crashed. I think it was probably purposely landed there. They don't know how many days it had been there. It had a nuclear symbol painted on it and a small capsule full of water or some sort of
dirt or something. Again, the police are being very cagey, being very, very careful not to tell too much, because this is such an easy incident to copycat. Drones are just too inexpensive. They're too easy to fly. There's no real way of shooting them down, and it's just you're not going to do it in the middle of Tokyo. You're not going to have guys firing away at these things.
Where are they going to find the firearms?
Well, they're going to they have, the police that are around do have sidearms, but it's not like they have anti-aircraft. They do maybe have an anti-aircraft battery somewhere, but maybe
well, the point is they don't know when it landed. It was probably over the last week or so. People aren't always up on the rooftop. They actually were just showing some new employees. This is the rooftop, this is downstairs, and that's when they found it.
And this is the security-obsessed
Yes.
administration. So that part of it, the mocking part, hasn't started yet, because this is serious. The technology of drones really should make people think, okay, anybody could have a small-scale cruise missile, basically, that you could send into a window, that you could send onto a roof, that could have something that is dangerous aboard it, and there's almost nothing you can do about it.
Well, apparently these drones, and this particular one was manufactured in China. I don't think that has any implications, but it just was manufactured in China.
But not that the news won't make a big deal about it. Oh, no.
But also, in their circuitry, they have areas where they're flown by GPS that they can't go into, apparently. I imagine those could be easily hacked, but apparently the Prime Minister's residence is not on one of those off-zone limits. But airports, areas of security, that sort of thing, are built into their IC chips, apparently.
We can't underestimate the creativity of people who want to do malicious things.
Sure.
And my view is that the technology is extremely dangerous, but there's nothing we can do about it. What are you going to fortify the roofs, put bars on all the windows? Maybe that's the way it's going to go.
Or outlaw drones, or there's always this overreaching and this overprotection that we frequently are faced with the administrations of any government, but in particular with this administration.
Well, it's kind of trendy also. There is, of course, in Japan this love of robots, and these are robotic devices, and they're kind of cool and scary at the same time.
Yeah.
And that's, I guess, why they're pushing the China angle, so that it's really scary rather than just a cool scary. But this has not been the big social or big technological change that it has been in other countries. You don't see, for example, in Japan, these beautiful, wonderful videos that we've been seeing on YouTube going all over the world with
the golf course, the canyons, the seaside,
the caves, in Vietnam, all these beautiful, beautiful things being shot with drones. You don't see that for Japan. And that's been a kind of a mystery. Why not? So this incident has suddenly raised consciousness about drones, but there's no Japanese word for it. They're called drone.
Right.
But maybe at some point they'll figure out a Chinese character version of this so that they can. But right now it's just a borrowed word.
Well, let's try and wrap this up.
Sure.
Our burning issue today is Japan's nuclear power, and a message was sent to the Prime Minister directly by a drone that was painted with the symbol of the nuclear radiation,
and with a little vial of something that contains cesium,
apparently it came from Fukushima.
Apparently so.
Okay. In addition to that, we were just talking briefly about robots and drones and that sort of thing. There were 2 robots that were sent into the failed reactor in Fukushima. We didn't talk much about that, but that is an amazing piece of technology. But the really interesting thing that strikes me is that although it's a harsh condition, we know it's a harsh condition, those 2 very expensive, elegant robots didn't last more than 10 minutes.
It's pretty harsh in there. And when you saw the video of the interior and saw the steam just pouring out from the melted fuel, that you don't, it's not, they don't look down at the melted fuel, but you can just, this gusts of steam going up. That's just, you're saying, God, it's terrible in there. And then they show the radiation levels at 1 sievert. Wow. This is really, really harsh. And there's no way that anything but a robot can survive for even a few minutes. And it seems that these ones...
Wow. Well, that issue is going to go on and on. It's going to be dozens of years before they can actually stop that. It's still leaking into the ocean. It's affecting the groundwater, apparently. The whole land surrounding that plant has been leveled so that they can have these tanks to store the spent, the contaminated water and the contaminated product that they're continually pumping out of there.
And beyond that, they've flattened the land for hundreds of square miles, basically, for bags of soil and leaves and all kinds of things from other prefectures from all over that they're going to put in this massive burial zone of radioactive materials. That's only started. And I was doing some calculations on how many truckloads this would be. At the current rate, it will take 1 million truck trips for the first phase. 1 million trucks going back and forth on these narrow country roads, which is all that's there. The scale of the cleanup is astonishing. And it's going to be for decades. You're right.
It's going to be for decades. And there is no promise that this won't happen again. I mean, even if they don't start up the nuclear reactors, there's still a risk that even without them started, some sort of a catastrophe, another tsunami. And they're predicted to happen, within the next 70 years. They give it a rather high percentage that, Tokyo, Osaka, further down south, it will be affected by something catastrophic. And all of the nuclear reactors, they need to have a source of water where they can cool these nuclear plants down are on the seacoast.
Almost all of them, and the Hamaoka plant in Shizuoka Prefecture, which before all the others were shut down for maintenance, he immediately shut down that plant because it's just too low as compared to sea level. It's right on the Pacific coast, so that if there were a tsunami, it would be completely wiped out. That thing is, still on the books as being possibly on the restarts. So this is going to be a hard fight.
Yes, well, it's going to continue. Any closing remarks before we wrap up today's burning issue?
I'm just sort of, in a solemn kind of mood because of your assessment. This nuclear power is a tough one.
Nuclear power is exceedingly tough. I think they will overcome it, but I don't know if they'll overcome it with nuclear power. So, with that, I'd like to wrap up today's burning issue, nuclear power in Japan. Thank you for watching Tokyo on Fire. You can download our podcast on iTunes, or you can watch on YouTube. Please send your comments and recommendations to us at comments@tokyoonfire.com. You can also post your comments to us on Twitter by using hashtag TokyoOnFire. Love to have your comments. Please participate in the discussion. Join us next week. Thank you very much.